Hello, everyone. We're going to get started today. I want to welcome you to the final part of our four-part series on building an online presence for search engines. It's really hard to believe that it's been a month already, but here we are at the final session. Today, we're going to discuss dealing with negative search results, as well as some advanced techniques for building out your online presence. Again, my name is Sabrina Clark. I'm with the marketing team here at Brand Yourself. Please feel free, if you have a question throughout, to type it into the question bar in the GoToWebinar control panel, and I'll always make sure to get to them at the end. You can follow along on Twitter using the hashtag BrandYourselfWebinar, or just feel free to tweet at us if you have a question. But let's get into it. So first, as always, I want to recap sort of what we've done throughout the series so far. We discussed how to actually build an online presence, and then it's a three-step process. First you want to create really high-quality websites and profiles. You want to optimize them for search engines so that it has the best chance of ranking when someone Googles your name. And then you want to continuously update them with content and keep it relevant. We talked about, setting up that personal website, as well as how to get on the right social media sites and, which ones to actually get on and how to set them up properly. And we also discussed, SEO factors to understand, the on-page stuff, things that are happening on the website that it's influencing how search engines display their search results, stuff like architecture and structure of the website, keyword content, relevancy. And then we talked about off-page factors like links and social sharing. And then last week we talked about, creative ways to create content on an ongoing basis. So you can really make sure that your information, your websites, your profiles are as relevant and active as possible. So this week, which is always a popular session, is, we're going to talk about how to handle negative search results. A large reason why a lot of people come to Brand Yourself in the first place is they're dealing with something negative or something that they don't want out there about them online. We actually, we polled some Brand Yourself users to see what types of negatives they were actually dealing with. And we found, kind of 5 common ones. The first being, and the most popular, are things that land you in the press, negative press mentions, whether the article is about yourself or if maybe you were just, stuck in the wrong place at the wrong time and now your name's in this article, or comments on a news article that you wish to now be removed. Information about an arrest, whether it's something that happened years ago in college and now there's a police citation out there, or you just found yourself in some trouble and now you're trying to be on the up and up and there's still information out there online. Negative online reviews, which is, a lot of you, I looked on your questions that you filled out when you registered, and I see a lot of you are actually dealing with negative online reviews. We'll talk about how to handle that today. But whether, it's deserved or not, negative reviews are definitely becoming a huge issue with the rise of some of these sites like Yelp. Libelous blog posts. So blog posts or entire websites that are dedicated to just, trashing someone else. And then unfortunately we see, revenge porn, negative images, basically anything that you wouldn't want showing up online about you, consider it negative. And we're going to talk about, what are your options if you find yourself with something negative. The first thing, which might sound obvious, but a lot of people don't even realize that they can do this, is, delete what you can. And it's important to note that this really only falls, you really can only leverage this if you're actually the person who owns the content. But, take an inventory of what's out there, go back in your social media sites, do a real, spring cleaning of all of your online presences and really make sure that there's nothing that you wouldn't want someone to come across. Like I always say, if you wouldn't mind showing it to someone in a job interview, you probably don't want it online. And even if it's not showing up in search results now, really just make sure, because you never know what could pop up. If you have control over it, delete it. And then if it's a website, so let's say you created a website or a blog a few years ago, and it's not necessarily negative, but it's a little embarrassing, and now it's showing up in your search results, you just want it out of there. You can actually use Google's URL removal tool and submit it. So once you've actually deleted that website, it could still show up in search engines because it's cached. So basically this removal tool will speed up that process of getting it out of the search results faster. And then, as a good practice, go ahead and update your privacy settings. Social media profiles are constantly updating their privacy settings. I know, Facebook's notorious for this, and I actually got, it wasn't necessarily some trouble, but I realized that, 1 or 2 years ago now, that they did a huge overhaul of some of their privacy settings, and things that I thought were marked private were actually very accessible. It wasn't anything too terrible. I just didn't really want it out there. It was things like, me out at a family party or a barbecue. I really didn't want that out on the public web. I wanted it just for my friends. So make sure that your, privacy settings are really up to date, and then go ahead and post at your own risk. If you have, a public Twitter or a public Instagram, keep in mind that, people are reading that, and it is public and can find its way into search engines. The second thing that you can do if you're dealing with a negative is really try to get it taken down. I always say it's like pleading to get it taken down. But here are your best bets. First, you need to know who actually owns the content. So if it's a domain, who owns the domain? So let's say it's a website, like it's a blog. Let's say it's realestateagentsblog.com. You want to find out who actually registered that domain, realestateagentsblog.com. And there's a number of ways you can do that. One site is who.is, which basically gives you registrar and hosting information for domains and websites. So as long as it's not protected, which you can still actually pay to get that information protected when you register the domain. There's some talk that that's no longer going to be the case soon. But right now, if you're registering a domain, you can pay a little extra to get the information protected. But in most cases, the information is readily available, and you'll be able to find the person's email address, their name. You really want to get that information, because if you're going to be reaching out to them, you want to know who's actually directly responsible for the website. And do a little research too, that especially for larger sites that foster kind of community contributions, the site's terms of service might be your best friend right here. So let's say someone wrote a blog on Huffington Post and it violates Huffington Post's terms of service. You can appeal to the Huffington Post and say, this post violates your terms of service. I would appreciate if you could take it down or modify it so that my information is not in there. And then frequently, 9 times out of 10, a site, if it does fall into a terms of service issue, will address it because they don't want something going against sort of their rules online. And then when you actually have that information in hand, you want to send a polite, well thought out email. When it comes to negative results, you can be rightfully passionate about them. You might be upset about this person who wrote it. So make sure that, when you are communicating with them, always be as overly professional and courteous as you can, because at the end of the day, this person would be doing you a favor taking it down, and they don't have to do it. So again, keep in mind, what I just said, they don't have to take it down. And the result can still live online. It could still live in search results. And just because it's removed from one website, it doesn't prevent it from popping up on another site or an aggregator site. So while you should definitely try as a first step to get it taken down, I want you to just kind of go into it knowing that it might not be very likely in your situation. The third thing that you can do is file a complaint with Google. So Google, like most internet things, has a terms of service, and if something violates that terms of service, they'll actually remove it from their search results. So in order to find out if your situation qualifies for this, you want to go to support.google.com/legal. And this is where you'll be able to find out all the information on if your situation qualifies to be removed by Google, and then also how you can go about that process of submitting the request. A few things that you want to do about this. First, be realistic with yourself. Does the content actually violate Google's terms of service? You want to absolutely read it, but for the most part, the big things about what they will remove is things like, is the information copyrighted? Is it personal info like a social security number or a credit card number? They announced very recently that they're now removing instances of revenge porn, which is great. So if you fall into that category, Google will actually honor that and remove it. But take a look at that list of what they'll remove and make sure that you fall in that category, one of those categories. Google won't remove something just because you don't want it online anymore. They're not going to remove a negative review. They're not going to remove a blog that someone wrote about you that just mentions your name. They simply won't. So be really realistic about if your situation falls into that before you, sort of file the request. And keep in mind, this only removes the content from Google search engines. So even if it gets removed from the search engines, it'll still, in many cases, live on the site. So it won't remove it from the actual website. Along the same lines of, sort of Google's terms of service, another option if you're dealing with a negative is you can file a DMCA takedown. And basically that stands for the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which was passed, and it protects copyrighted information. So basically what it says is if a website is using copyrighted information without your consent, you can file this DMCA takedown and it'll have to be removed. A few things to keep in mind here is you must be the copyright owner and be able to prove it. Probably the most easiest thing to prove is copyright of an image or a graphic. So if you're able to prove that you're the original owner, whether it's trademarked or you have the original file, a DMCA takedown is used in a lot of cases of revenge porn because, if it's an image that you've sent to someone, you can prove that you're that copyright owner. But you have to be the copyright owner basically to use this. Make sure that you're documenting the entire issue along the way, taking the necessary screenshots of of the occurrence on the website that you're trying to take down. Document all the proof that you're the copyright owner. And then again, you're going to need to know who hosts the site. So you can use a service like I mentioned before, who.is. And you need to, kind of go through that process of filing the complaint. There are plenty of templates and filing services that you can easily find. And then the next step is basically to file that complaint and wait. Another thing that I'm going to say about DMCA takedowns is there, and this is kind of one of those crafty tips. It doesn't always work, but we've seen it work in the past, and I wanted to let you guys know in case you fall into this situation. There's sort of a way to get a little crafty with copyright. And what I mean by this is if the situation doesn't initially fit a copyright law situation, you might be able to still leverage it by finding a way to get a copyrighted image on the page. So I'll explain it like this. Let's say someone, wrote a blog post about you, and it's negative. Maybe it's someone that you had to let go, and now that they've written this blog post on this site, and it's really doing some damage to your reputation. You might, by getting a copyrighted image onto the page, you might be able to use the copyright, sort of guidelines to get it taken down. And probably the easiest way to do it is to upload, a copyrighted image to the comment section. And once that image is uploaded, you can then, file the request with either by going directly to the website and saying, hey, my copyrighted information is in the comments on this post. I would like this removed. Or if you can go a little bit further and file that, takedown request. We've seen this work in situations where it's just easier for the site to remove the whole thing completely, especially if it's sort of an older post that isn't really, relevant or newsworthy anymore. It's just easier for them to take it all down than have to go back and forth and deal with this, one comment. That's when we've seen it work. And then you sort of follow the same process I identified earlier. I will say, this absolutely is not a be-all, end-all solution. We've seen it work, several times, but we've also seen it not work a ton of times. I just want to let you know that there are some ways that you can, kind of get around it. So moving on. So the next negative thing that you can do is more related to negative reviews. And I want to cover this section because we're asked this question all the time, and we've seen people kind of not go about negative reviews the way that they should. And the big question whenever someone gets a negative online review is, should I respond to it? Of course, if it's offline and you sort of get that negative review or get a complaint, you want to always respond. So your gut reaction might be to respond online, but there's definitely some situations where you don't want to. So right now, I sort of outlined, should I respond online? And again, this isn't, sort of black and white. There are very much gray areas. But this is sort of a guideline that you should be going by. On the right, these are the things that you should respond, but the right way. I know something that's really relevant right now that's going on is that situation with the diner owner that yelled at the child that was screaming and sort of caused this scene, and the mom wrote a negative review on their Facebook page. Regardless of who was right in the situation, the diner owner, definitely didn't respond in the right way. She used a lot of profanities and was basically screaming online at this person, at this mother who was filing sort of this complaint on the Facebook page. The last thing that you want to do is lash back out at the customer. It's sort of bad business practice and also bad, for your own online presence because people are going to see that. So you want to respond the right way on sites like Yelp, Google Review, Yahoo Local, industry sites. Even if you also solve the situation offline, which I definitely recommend, you want to sort of leave that trail online. So if someone says something, negative or leaves you a bad review and you know who it is and you call them, and sort of smooth it out, let's say, oh, hey, give me another chance. This next meal is on me. I would love to, really make this up for you or up to you. You want to put that record online as well because someone coming across this negative review isn't going to know that you called the person and sorted it out. So post something saying, as we spoke on the phone, I'm glad that I'm able to get a second chance. Can't wait to have you back in the restaurant, or however you want to pose it. On the right, these are the things that you really want to avoid responding to. Ripoff report is definitely one. Pissed consumer, any sort of negative forum that is just intended to breed negativity, you really don't want to respond to them for the reason that it's just fanning the flames. It really, we've never seen it work out well. What it has only done is given authority to that negative review, and now it's ranking incredibly high for the person. So these are the guidelines you should be going by. And then it's all in the approach. So if you know who the person is, definitely respond offline rather. And if it's the right site, make that record of it online. And if it's not the right site, don't respond. Especially if you think it was, a malicious review by a competitor or whatnot. Another thing that you can do, which is again one of these like kind of sneaky I don't want to say sneaky, but they're one of these cute tactics, if you would, that don't necessarily work all the time, but they definitely are worth mentioning because in your situation you might find that it'll work. But what you could do is bump it off the first page, and I'll explain what that means. Let's say you have a negative Huffington Post article that's ranking for your name. The way search engines, and especially Google, operates is they want to provide the most relevant content and the best search experience to their users. And one of the facets of that is they want to provide diverse information. So if you're searching for something, they don't want to show, typically, 15 Twitter profiles or 10 Huffington Post articles. So you can use this to your advantage. So let's go back to that example where you have a negative Huffington Post article. You might, by getting another article on the Huffington Post that's positive and more relevant and up to date, you might bump off that original Huffington Post article. And you might be sitting there saying, well, how am I going to get an article again on the Huffington Post or a site like that? Really do your research into the site that's your negative and see if you can get if there's contribution opportunities. With Huffington Post, there are blogging opportunities. You can create a profile on Huffington Post so you can comment on things. Really just do some research. Of course, if this is something like ripoff report, you're not going to want to create a ripoff report to bump off the original one because that'll just be so counterproductive. But if it's something that is sort of a neutral site that just happens to have your negative on it, you might be able to leverage this. Again, as I said before, with using the copyright law, this is not always a viable option. We've seen it work. We've seen it not work. But I think it's worth mentioning if you think that you can leverage this positively. So though all of the tips that I outlined are definitely options, but they're very specific to specific use cases. You might be in a situation where you're not going to be able to file a request with Google, or you're not going to be able to bump it off that first page, or leverage it, file a DMCA takedown. The best way to really handle negative search results is to build a positive online presence. So you can essentially, bury all that irrelevant negative stuff and fill that first page with positive info about you. And that's sort of full circle. Everything that we talked about in these webinar series is building that online presence and going through that 3-step process, creating really high quality websites and profiles, optimizing them so that they rank well, and then continuously updating them over time. This is your best option if you're dealing with a negative and if you're not dealing with a negative. For a number of reasons. One, let's say you get something removed through one of the ways I mentioned, you're still opening yourself up for something else negative popping up. Or even if you got that negative review, you still don't have a stellar online presence. So regardless, you should be building out that positive online presence and really trying to make yourself own that first page of results and come across as the best light possible. A few things to keep in mind across the board when you're dealing with negatives. These things take time. Building a positive online presence, takes a few weeks to a few months. When you're dealing with a negative, it adds all the more complexity to it because you're actually combating something. It's no longer the conversation of, okay, if I can, get my website on the first page or just really, get some really nice properties ranking on the first page. Now you want to do that while also attempting to knock something off the first page. So you're combating something. We've seen these, depending on the authority of the site or the negative, we've seen it take months. It could take up to a year. it's different from case to case. A lot of it has to do with how authoritative that initial negative is. So if you're dealing with a negative New York Times article, it's going to be vastly more difficult to bump off that first page or bury than, let's say, realestateblog.com or, a smaller blog. So just keep that in mind and keep at it. It's really important that you're constantly, working to build out your online presence. Building a website and a couple social media profiles won't mean anything if you're not constantly updating them and keeping them relevant with new, unique content. So be a little realistic with yourself. If you have the time to actually put in that would be required to handle the situation. And if you don't, then you should, take a look at, hiring someone to do it for you. The other thing that, just building out that online presence does, and I touched upon it a little bit, is it protects your online reputation. It's a lot harder to sort of penetrate that first page of results if you're actively building out a positive online presence. So regardless, you should keep building your online presence because it'll make it all the more difficult for that negative to rank on the first page. And I also, I always say, would you rather Google someone and all you find is a negative result about them? It looks a lot worse than if you Google someone and you find that negative, but you also see, their website, testimonials, they're active on social media, they've got articles out there. It paints a much broader picture, and it's a lot easier to sort of overlook that negative or chalk it up to people make mistakes than if you're doing nothing to protect yourself online or combat that negative. Before I jump into questions, I already see some coming through. Brand Yourself can help, especially if you're dealing with a negative. We have a range of tools and services to help you. Our do-it-yourself tool sort of takes you that process of optimizing your profiles for search engines. I'll be honest, if you're dealing with a negative, and you really, if you're going to choose to do it yourself, you really got to put a lot into it. So you're probably, you definitely can do it yourself. I don't want you to think you can't. Anyone can do this. It's just a matter of you got to be able to do it right and also commit the time to put in. So we have some services that'll help you get there a little faster. Our Head Start service, we build that presence for you, and then it's your job then to manage it yourself. So if you're doing a negative, if you're handling a negative, under Head Start will build your websites and profiles and give you that action plan. But then it's up to you to really start to combat that negative and keep everything updated. That's why, I always say if you're dealing with a negative, you're realistic with yourself that you're not going to be able to commit the time necessary, you probably fall into our concierge service. We're going to do everything for you, build everything, optimize everything, and then we're going to manage everything over time and really work for you to give yourself the best chance of outranking that negative. So if you do have a negative, I highly recommend at least, giving us a call and discussing the concierge service a little bit more. It just realistically, unless you can really dedicate the time to it, that's your best bet. But those are our services and as well as our tool. I will jump into some questions, but I will say we also offer for everyone on the webinar a free personal branding consultation where we'll basically take a look at your results and provide you some tips for how to handle them. If you are dealing with a negative, I highly recommend this consultation so you at least understand your options. And we can kind of give you a game plan for what you're going to really need to do to combat that negative. But to schedule one, you can schedule one on the calendar directly using that link. Just type it into your browser, bit.ly/BY consults. Or you can email me directly at sclark@BrandYourself.com, and I'll make sure that you can get scheduled. But I do want to, we have some time for some questions that I want to get into. If I am unable to answer your question or if it's a really, specialized case, I'll recommend that you just email me at the end. Okay, so someone was asking about sort of that little trick that I mentioned about using copyright law to get something taken down that's not necessarily copyrighted. And the question is, can you expand on what copyrighted info would qualify to take down the comment? So basically, copyrighted info is something that you've created that you own the rights to. Once you create something, it's yours, and without your permission, someone can't use it. So probably the easiest thing to do is leverage an image. So maybe you have a logo that you've trademarked, or you have images or pictures that you've taken for your portfolio that maybe is watermarked or whatnot. Just something that you can prove is yours and that the site didn't have permission to use. I hope that makes that clear. If you want me to expand on it a little bit further, I'm more than happy to do so. Just type a follow-up one in the chat bar. Okay. So someone asked about clicking on search results. They asked, does clicking often on a lower rated Google result move up its ranking? So clicks are interesting. These are a bit of a gray area. To give you a very basic answer, when you click on something, it does help it rank a little bit higher, because what the click is really symbolizing is it's saying someone's interested in this content and they're going to see it. So a piece of content like an article that goes viral that's getting all these people from everywhere clicking on it, of course it's going to help it rank higher because now all these people are interested in it. However, it can backfire. Just clicking on it from your computer over and over and over again isn't really going to do anything for a number of reasons. One, Google recognizes what your IP address is and isn't really going to factor in those clicks beyond that initial one that you do, because it recognizes that people might try to game the system this way. Hey, I'm just going to get 1,000 people to click on this and help it rank higher. It's really not going to do much. You might get a little bump, but it's really not a long-term solution, and I really wouldn't waste my time attempting to do it. If you have a Google result that you're trying to raise a little bit higher, what I would do is take a look at, what can I do to make it more relevant? Is it optimized as perfectly as it can be? And I would use our do-it-yourself tool for that. So let's say you're trying to get your Twitter to rank a little bit higher. Is your name in the third person in your bio? Have you filled out all the forms? Do you have an image? Do you have you filled out your little tagline bio, your location? Are you active? Are you actually tweeting on it? Your energy is much better well spent, trying to figure out how to make that as search engine friendly as possible and keep it updated than, worrying about clicks on it. I hope that was clear. Okay, so someone asked about how they're interested about setting up that online consultation. So I would recommend emailing me or using that link to schedule it directly. Basically what it'll do is it'll pull up a calendar that has all of the available slots to schedule with one of our experts. So you can pick something that's good for you. So if evenings work well or mornings are better, you can schedule something that works. And you'll get right on the calendar, we'll have all your information, and then we'll call you when it's time for the consultation. Okay, so someone asked about high authority sites and being able to sort of combat them. So the question is, even if the site is high authority, like a legal site, but the information there is static, just a document that isn't updated, can I still combat it with active postings on my part? So absolutely. Just because something is a high authority, it makes it more difficult to move, but by all means not impossible. At Brand Yourself, we see movement all the time on really high authority websites. You just got to work at them a little bit higher. The good thing, it seems here, is that you I won't lie, the legal sites are difficult because they are such high authority, but it's not impossible. By really building out that positive online presence and keeping it active and staying at it, you'll be able to combat it, or you should be able to combat it, is what I should say. You also have relevancy on your side. The more outdated and static that result becomes, and the more that you're doing to create and build that online presence and keep the positive stuff relevant, the better chance that you have of starting to see some movement. Where you are going to see some difficulty is when you're dealing with a negative that is being updated, like an article that's still being commented on, or a video or something like that that's still very much relevant that people are watching or looking at. That's going to be very, very difficult. But your situation, I would want to take a look at it specifically. But from what you've told me, I don't see why you wouldn't have an issue seeing some movement there, given that you do the right stuff. Okay, so I am going to answer one more question and then kind of go from there. So the last question that we're going to take today is about sites that remove or promise to remove negative information. So what I will say is there are many sites that promise or guarantee to remove information from the web. There are some sites that accomplish it. Typically, they're incredibly expensive. Mixed in with that, there are also websites that promise to remove it and then don't, and still charge an incredibly large amount of money. What I will say is, if you're dealing with a situation where you think you're going to get information, you want to get something removed, and you've tried everything that I've discussed and it doesn't seem to be getting you anywhere, and you're thinking about getting one of these companies or hiring one of these companies, what I will say is, and going back to it, is even if you do get that one result removed, it really doesn't do anything for you by ways of building out your online presence or ensuring that something else isn't going to show up. Let's say you get some personal information removed from the web. It doesn't prevent another, white pages from popping up tomorrow, because all that information is constantly being, scraped and posted online. So I always, highly recommend you want to be building out that online presence because it's a real long-term solution. It's going to give you the best chance of dealing with the negative in the now and protect your online presence in the future, and really make sure that not only when someone Googles you that they don't find anything negative, but they find something really positive about you and really great information. So that's absolutely, I think, and what we always recommend is the way to go. So I'm going to wrap it up. But if I didn't get to your question, I see a couple questions still in the queue, but they seem to be very specific to your own situation. So what I'm going to recommend here is either email me right now your question and I'll get you the best answer I can, or schedule that consultation. Again, if you're dealing with a negative and you realistically just don't have the time or the energy to really put in to combat it, I recommend scheduling the consultation to see how we would be able to help out, or at the very least, schedule it so you have a game plan so you know what you need to do going forward. But I want to thank you all for joining me on today's webinar. If this is your first of the 4 sessions, I'll be sending out the recording to this later tonight, and I will also send all the links to all of the recordings so you have access to all of the sessions from the series. If you've stuck it out for all 4, thank you so much. I hope you found it valuable. If you want to see anything else covered in some of our future sessions, please let me know. Send me an email. Our next webinar, which you can sign up for, it's on our blog. is a social media boot camp. So we're going to tackle all things social media, how to really get it into shape, and really give you some great tips there. So if you're struggling with some social media or just want to learn a few new things about it, I recommend the boot camp. It's going to be a real, high intensity session. So thank you all again, and I will see you on the next webinar.